Leonardo da Vinci, Chapter 9, Science and Art. Louis XII was vague about the date of his arrival in Italy when he wrote that letter. He only said it to help Chaumont and Leonardo. But as things turned out, he really had to come over the mountains after all. The state of Genoa was supposed to be under French control, but at this time the Genoese tried to defy the king. So Louis collected a magnificent army, like the one Charles had brought over before him, and went to Genoa. At the very sight of these thousands of splendid soldiers, all armed to the teeth, the Genoese backed down. There was no battle at all, and the French occupied the city. Then Louis went on to Milan to pay a visit to his viceroy and spend a few months. He arrived in May 1507. Naturally, his presence set off a whole round of parties and celebrations. It must have seemed like old times to Leonardo, who was called on to furnish special amusements and entertainments just as he had done in the days of Lodovico il Moro. But he enjoyed himself far more at the French court than he had ever done with the Forza clan. These men understood him and appreciated him and did not keep him on starvation wages as the gross Lodovico had done. Still, Leonardo was always being reminded of the other time because a lot of familiar faces appeared at the balls and plays. All of the nobility of North Italy had accepted the new state of affairs. It was almost as if the castle had always been occupied by Frenchmen. One of the guests might well have complained that Leonardo had forgotten all about her, but she didn't. This was Isabella d'Este, who was thoroughly enjoying the social season. Probably Leonardo groaned when he saw her coming, because she had never stopped sending word to him and begging for that picture. Now that he was under the wing of the royal house of France, he always had an excellent excuse. He was painting something for Louis XII. He was designing a palace for Sire de Chaumont. He was booked up for months, even years ahead. Isabella could not argue that. She was more important than these gentlemen. And in any case, she had a lot of new lions to keep her happy. Within a few months, Leonardo realized that he was very popular. This made him happy and sure of himself and his future. He determined to cut himself off from Florence completely by settling the quarrel with the Signoria. So he sent word that the deposit he had left with them and whatever other money he had in the city was to be theirs. This settled the affair of the advance they had paid for the Battle of Onchiari fresco. So now he did not have to go back unless he wanted to. He was free. Never again would he have to work on the fresco that had brought him so much shame and trouble. He had a clear conscience, and he was a free man, thanks to the Viceroy of Milan. Also, he was able to take pupils again, as befitted a master. His personal arrangements were still as simple as ever. The servant Soleil was always there, a burden Leonardo was years in getting rid of. Usually some old woman did the housekeeping and the real work of looking after him. When he began to take on apprentices again, he found a genuine helper in the person of Francesco Melzi. Melzi was a very young man, the son of an important Milanese family. He started out wanting to learn to paint just as an accomplishment, not a life work. He had some talent, however, and the better he and Leonardo got to know each other, the more he determined to stay with the painter. Melzi looked after Leonardo much better than the selfish Soleil had ever done. He was very loyal and was to be a great comfort in Leonardo's old age, taking the place of a devoted son to the lonely man. Leonardo had been in Milan nearly a year and a half. He was happy and busy, spending his time on architectural designs and city planning, painting for the king, studying science as he loved to do, and turning his hand now and then to the amusing gadgets that Chaumont wanted for his parties. For one great ball, he made one of his blue ceilings that looked like the sky, with birds flying around over the heads of the dancers. They were artificial birds on strings hung through the roof. At this time, Leonardo decided that he must go to Florence for a visit. You remember that when his father died, he had left nothing to Leonardo in his will. His brother Francesco, to make up for this slight, named Leonardo as his sole heir. Now Francesco was dead, and Leonardo's greedy younger brothers and sisters were contesting their uncle's will. They insisted that they should have the property, that Leonardo had no right to it. Probably they thought he was too busy in Milan with all his grand acquaintance to put up a fight against them. But Leonardo was angry. In return for what they were trying to do to him, he started a new claim against his father's will, saying that he had a right to part of that inheritance. To do this, he must be in Florence and urge his own case. Lawsuits in Italy took months and months. If you didn't have powerful backing, they were likely to drag on for longer than that. So Leonardo tried to prepare the way for a quick action, as well as success, by taking with him as many letters from very important people as he could gather. Louis XII himself wrote to the Signoria saying that our dear and well-beloved Leonardo da Vinci, our painter and engineer in ordinary, was forced to come to Florence because of litigation over certain inheritances. Because he, the king, needed Leonardo back again very soon, he begged the authorities to hurry the matter up in the best and briefest delivery of justice that may be. That was very useful, and it must have delighted Leonardo to be the King of France's own engineer. He couldn't possibly have asked for a better title. Besides this, he brought a letter from Charles de Amboise affirming that the king was in a hurry for Leonardo to come back because the artist was working on a special picture for him. Leonardo had other influential friends too. He got them all to use their names, to ask favors from the people of Florence who might help put the lawsuit through without undue delay. Then he himself went to Florence, not as a man looking for work, but rather as a dignitary who was in a hurry. He found the people who could handle the affair and turned over his documents and stated his case, and got things moving as well as he could. But he knew it would be a long business in spite of all this. Legal affairs were never settled right away, even for the great. He had already arranged to stay with an old friend during the time he must spend in the city. This friend was a younger man, Rustici. He had known of Leonardo a long time, ever since Rustici first started work as an apprentice in Verrocchio's studio some time after Leonardo had finished his own apprenticeship. Rustici was a professional sculptor and painter like the others. Unlike most of them, he also had money of his own and didn't depend on what he could earn. He was not merely a dabbler, he could do good work, and when he had a job, he was just as eager as anyone else to do it as well as possible. He had always tried to follow in Leonardo's footsteps. The two men had a lot in common. Rustici, too, was interested in finding out things about air and water and flying and so forth. Also, like Leonardo, he was not conventional. He liked unusual animals and filled his house with very odd pets. There was a porcupine running around loose and a tame eagle that flew through the rooms and frightened strangers. A pet raven that could talk was free to fly as it liked. Rustici was the center of a group of young people who enjoyed a fresh outlook and tried to outdo each other in eccentricity. At the time Leonardo arrived in Florence, his host had just been awarded the most important commission that had ever come his way and was much excited about it. The city fathers had asked him to make bronze groups to put over the doors of the baptistry, where the marble figures that had stood there for years had finally crumbled away. Rustici designed huge figures for this purpose. Making the groups involved a number of technical problems, and he found Leonardo very kind and helpful in solving them. Needless to say, lots of other sculptors of Florence criticized Rustici for getting Leonardo to help, because they were jealous. They said he was exploiting his famous guest, but neither Rustici nor Leonardo paid any attention to this ill-natured gossip. Leonardo enjoyed life at Rustici's house. The young man was a lively person, and so were his friends. They tried to outdo each other in mechanical tricks and practical jokes. They would give dinner parties and command each other to make new toys for the occasion. One night at Rustici's house, when everybody was sitting at the table, a tree suddenly grew up through the floor with plates and everything for dinner on its branches, which swung over the table and handed each guest his first course. Then it went back through the floor until time for the next course, when it came back with more plates, and so on. It was just the sort of silly, harmless invention that delighted Leonardo. In this friendly atmosphere he worked constantly, inventing new machines of all sorts. He decided that it was time to rearrange his papers and leave them in some sort of order for posterity. For while he had started so many books and treatises and collections, he never had time to finish any of them. He really didn't want to finish things when it came to the point. As soon as he thought of bringing something to completion, he would decide he didn't know enough about it as yet, and he kept the book open to catch any new thought he might want to pop into it. However, for the moment, he did want to get his books into print, and at Rustiki's house he had enough leisure to get started. Characteristically, he drew up his plans for the publishing, and wrote a note to his future readers. Begun at Florence on the 22nd day of March, 1508, and this is to be a collection without order, taken from many papers which I have copied here, hoping to arrange them later, each in its place, according to the subject of which they may treat. Then, being Leonardo da Vinci, he went off at a tangent, set to work, and designed a new kind of printing press, which was a great improvement on the one that had been in use for the past century. Soon afterwards, as we would have expected, he decided not to publish his works just yet after all. There was still so much to be added. Instead, he returned to his old interest, anatomy. The dissection of human bodies was not shocking to the world of Leonardo. Some years before, there had been a lot of prejudice against it, but during the Renaissance, when everyone was keen to learn and study, the objectors lost ground. Dissection of the dead was an accepted affair. 3 years before this, after a criminal had been hanged, some famous anatomy professors were permitted to do a public dissection of the body. One of them lectured and pointed out the work to the audience, while the others did the actual cutting. Anybody who wanted to could come and watch. Naturally, not many people wanted to, and yet there were quite a few who were interested enough to brave the unpleasantness. As for artists like Leonardo and Michelangelo, the world understood that they must study bodies so that they would know about bones and muscles. Leonardo had already dissected a number of bodies. Now he set to work to do more. He had an arrangement with various hospitals whereby he was permitted to use the unclaimed bodies of patients soon after they had died. From the careful notes he kept on all this, the doctors of today can often diagnose what it was that killed those patients so many years ago. One old man had obviously been a victim of arteriosclerosis. Another had tuberculosis. Not everybody would have had Leonardo's nerves to hold up to this kind of research. There were no refrigerators at that time, and nothing was known of preservatives. Often Leonardo had to work all day and all night to finish before the body was buried. In his notebook, he warned people that it was a difficult task. You might be prevented by loathing, he said, but he was tough. One of the most interesting things he said about all this difficult dissection concerns the importance of illustrating descriptions of anatomy. He said that it was much easier and safer to draw a picture of the thing you were describing than to depend wholly upon words. This is perfectly true. No medical student could learn half so quickly or so well if his textbooks didn't have diagrams to illustrate what is being taught. Leonardo used many drawings along with words in his anatomical studies. In order to give a knowledge of the true form of any part of the body of man, he wrote, I shall make it a rule to provide 4 representations from 4 sides of every part, and of the bones I will provide 5 by cutting them through the center. His drawings were so accurate that they could be used from medical textbooks today. As he made these drawings, Leonardo also discovered much about the human body that was not known before he observed it. He drew the spine so that the observer can see how it functions. He figured out how the ribs move with breathing. He made a remarkable study of the skull. He made 20 anatomical drawings of the hand. At another time, he reported, after exhaustive study, what he had found out about muscles. But it was when he came to the action of the heart that he got close to the discoveries of later centuries. The heart is a vessel formed by stout muscles, vivified and nourished by arteries and veins, as are also the other muscles. At another time he wrote vividly, the heart is the nut which gives rise to the tree of the veins. Many of the laws of nature which he perceived had never been put into anything like the correct light before. We cannot cease to marvel at Leonardo's remarkable powers of observation. We must remember the great number of things he was doing all the time. He would not sit down at one subject like anatomy or physics or the chemistry of paint and work at it for years until he had squeezed all the juice out of it. No, he would keep coming back to it as he did with the flying machine, year after year. Then he would break off to study something else, such as the nature of water. Yet he was always able to take up a subject where he had left off. With this method, in one lifetime, he rolled up a sum of knowledge that it took the rest of mankind generations to arrive at. Leonardo planned to do a book about the anatomy of animals, the movements of animals with 4 feet, among which is man, who likewise in his infancy crawls on all fours. He dissected a bear and an ape. He intended to show the extent of the differences between the foot of the bear or ape and the human foot. A bear's foot, as you may already know, has a very human appearance. It was natural that Leonardo should compare it with an ape's. He got the body of a lion that had just died in the city zoo in Florence, and he observed that the beast had much better sight than man, and a much keener sense of smell. At least these nerves were more efficient than they had been in a man's skull, and the organ of smell had more room in the lion's brain. Sometimes Leonardo was worried by the lack of opportunity he had to write down all these observations. He made a little apology. In these studies, I have been hindered neither by avarice nor by negligence, but simply by want of time. Yet look what he accomplished. Even so. As might be expected, Leonardo thought a good deal about the secret of life itself. As he watched an animal killed at the slaughterhouse, he would wonder just where the spark of life resided in the body. A frog, for example, where was its mainspring? Why was it alive one moment and dead the next? Some injuries killed, others only maimed, and the body got well. Needless to say, Leonardo never satisfied himself on this question. In the course of his life, he dissected the bodies of many sorts of animals as well as human beings. He made a lot of important comparisons between their muscular and skeletal structures. As he did so, he developed a tremendous respect and wonder for life itself. How marvelous was a living body! In cunning and beauty, it outdid the most cunning and beautiful engine that any man could ever contrive. Finally, Leonardo came to a most advanced conclusion, that to destroy life is stupid and wicked. Let not your rage or malice destroy a life, he wrote, for indeed he who does not value it does not himself deserve it. After this, Leonardo gave up for the rest of his life the invention of murderous weapons and engines. Even in Florence, there was an end at last to lawsuits. As it became evident that Leonardo's case would soon be finished, he prepared to go back to Milan. Hahn had begun to get impatient. Leonardo wrote a soothing letter to fix things up. I have had the feeling that the small return made for the great kindness I have received from your Excellency may have made you annoyed with me. He added that he would be back at Easter time. There were a lot of things to arrange, mostly practical matters. The king had promised a pension to Leonardo, who now asked if it had started to arrive. This time he intended to be independent of Charles de Amboise in Milan. He would set up on his own, though of course the viceroy would still be his patron. When he got back to Milan, he found no dearth of pupils. His housekeeping books show that he had a great number. At last Salé was off the payroll, or should have been. He had set up for himself as a painter of sorts, though he never was as good as he should have been after all his years studying with Leonardo. However, he was still an expense to Leonardo. Salé's father had become Leonardo's tenant at the vineyard which Lodovico had given him in the last days of Forza power. But Salé still needed money. Leonardo wrote, on October 1508, I received 30 gold thalers. I lent 13 to Salé to make up his sister's dowry and had 17 left. However, the king's pension was arriving regularly. Leonardo had no worry about his livelihood.